Oh, yes. This is the Hardcore Marketing Show. I'm Casey Cheshire, your host for this epic journey. And today's show, sponsored by Cheshire Impact, on a mission to help people maximize their use of Pardot and Salesforce. CheshireImpact.com. Bam. All right, there it is. I hit the button and we are on fire. And I am excited to introduce my guest today. So excited. And I'm not even just saying that. There's so much stuff to talk about. He is a global chief marketing officer, global proportions, which we will talk about, award-winning on the branding side, creative side, digital strategy, media leader. And he builds impossible to ignore brands, impossible to ignore. And we have some great examples of that. Formerly the vice president of advertising, media, digital, social at Wendy's. And yes, he is the snarky Wendy's guy. It's his brainchild. We're going to talk about that soon. If you don't know about that, you will, and you'll be laughing today. It's awesome. Also, formerly global CMO at Papa John's. Maybe was there during some drama. And then most recently, global CMO at Potbelly Sandwiches. And now onto a new adventure, which we can't quite talk about. Brandon Rhoten, welcome to the show, sir.
Good to have you. Good to be here. Thank you.
Man, if you do any more, your intro is gonna be like twice as long.
I'm not done yet. We'll see what happens next. I'm not done yet.
Well, I'm excited, and I kind of alluded to it in your introduction. We've got social. We've got all sorts of things flying around. You've been at some big brands, some brands that I like to snack on. I told you earlier, I worked at Wendy's when I was a kid, and I still eat there. Good brand. And you've been in these different situations. So I'm going to stop talking because you're the star here. And let me pass you this thing. It's kind of heavy, but it looks like you work out. So here we go. Ugh. Okay, here we go. You got it? Thor's hammer?
Yeah.
Got it? Okay.
I got it.
All right.
I got it.
All right,
I
sweet.
got it.
Sweet. You didn't realize there was going to be interactive portion of this podcast. That was it. Just now. Take Thor's hammer, smash for me some kind of myth, bogus strategy, misconception. Just set the record straight once and for all.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest myths out there right now is not every brand should be heavy up in social media. I know that sounds a little strange from the guy who kind of brought Wendy's into the world in social, but the fact is that's a strategy to actually create something larger. Social media in and of itself is not some magical thing that you just need to turn on as a brand. So not every brand needs to be on social media.
It's not magic. And I was literally stopped in my tracks because you've done so many interesting things on social, but you're saying, look, this just even, and to hear it from you, it really holds weight. This is just a particular strategy that I used at a particular company. It was right for them. It may not be immediately right for you. So don't just go listen to some, BuzzFeed article and decide that you need to do that too.
That's exactly right. And I'm not saying don't own your handles. I'm not saying don't register your company on Twitter. You should, but people put disproportionate amount of time, I think, to whatever's trendy at the moment. And if you're going crazy on TikTok right now, that's great. Have at it. I hope it's fun for you. But if it doesn't actually further some larger brand goal, if it doesn't actually orient around an objective that's bigger than the platform, I would argue you're performing tactics without objectives behind them. And that's just inherently bad marketing. And we could talk about Wendy's for a minute and why we went there, but it was part of a larger positioning effort. So we had to be there in order to actually achieve our positioning objectives. I didn't have to do that at a lot of the companies I work for. So I didn't. So you have to pick and choose the platforms you utilize and pick and choose the outlets, the tactical outlets for the objectives you have as a brand. You can't just jump on what's trendy and what's interesting.
Yeah. You know what? Happening right now. Have you heard of Clubhouse?
Oh, no kidding, man. I signed up for it. I'm getting pinged every 30 seconds on that guy. And you know what? Clubhouse is awesome if you have a larger objective. So if your brand needs to be a thought leader, if your brand needs to have two-way communication with, other thought leaders, it could make a ton of sense to be on Clubhouse, but you don't just jump on it to jump on it. Now you may do it to learn and experiment, but I think TikTok's an example. I think Clubhouse is an example right now. I think, the million messaging apps that are popping up sort of in the wake of all the craziness that's been going on. You got to make sure there's a larger brand objective behind the destination you're going to spend time, money, and resources on. I don't care how much money you have as a company. If you've got $1 billion budget, your resources are still finite.
Yeah.
So to apply, a crazy amount of resources to something just because you read an article on it, not because it connects into something much larger you're trying to achieve, I think is a complete waste of time.
Yeah, wise words. I love how you put that, tactics without objectives, which is what a lot of us do. I've done that.
Yeah.
And it
And
may or
I
may
get
not
it.
work.
Yeah, and I get it. The urge is to do something, right? And to
Yeah.
show you're doing something and to give some sort of metric associated with what you're doing, a follower count or whatever. We never at Wendy's talked about our follower counts, ever.
Really?
Not once. It wasn't even important to us. What was important was the larger positioning objective and were we actually achieving that objective? And the platforms like Twitter, like Facebook, like, dozens of others we played on were all built around those metrics and those objectives. So I think I get the urge to do something. I get the urge to take action. But if that action isn't backed by an objective, what's the point?
Totally. I want to ask you some on the how on that side, but can you tell me the Wendy's story? Tell me,
Yeah.
How you got in there. How did you even get in there? And then what led you to make that call of social being the right tactic, or what were the objectives? Walk us through that story, your approach there.
Yeah, so you got to rewind a bit back to 2010, 2011. This is
Should
the
we put a
time
rewind sound in, like?
hey, have at it, have at it. If you got a soundboard, you want to throw some effects, have at it. But you got to rewind back then to when fast food was in a very different spot. This is when pink slime was a thing. This is when kids getting fat from fast food was the thing. This is when Chipotle and Five Guys were emerging on the scene and taking over sort of the lunchtime fast food audience.
Yeah.
So what was happening was fast food wasn't cool, and Wendy's was especially uncool.
This is 2011, right? Is that when you started?
2010, 2011. I started at Wendy's in 2011.
Okay.
And at the time, the brand had about a decade of traffic loss kind of racked up. And again, all backed by Dave had died and the brand sort of lost its rudder when he died. And then on top of that, all these new emerging sort of fast casuals came in and sort of the zeitgeist began to turn against fast food. So Wendy's brought in a new CEO, a guy named Emil Brolick, a genius. This guy who had been at Wendy's before, had been the CEO of Taco Bell, and part of that sort of wave of new. One of the desires was we actually need to understand digital marketing. There was no digital marketing function in the organization.
Wow.
So while there was a traditional media function, obviously, it was spending hundreds of millions of dollars on traditional media. There wasn't a digital marketing function at all.
In 2011, 2010, 2011, no digital marketing.
Yeah. And I tell you, food tends to be a little bit behind everybody else. So, and I don't know why, but food just tends to be a little more conservative in what they do. And for a long time, what worked in food was heavy TV and spokespeople and LTOs, limited time offer products. So 2010, 2011, they decided to bring on a digital function and somebody knew somebody and they reached out to me. And I was working at an agency and doing a lot of digital work at an agency, and they pulled me over to help them build out a digital function. And I started with no people and no budget. The kind of organization, while management thought this is important, the kind of core organization, including the franchisees, really didn't know what digital marketing was. There was really no understanding of the capabilities it would bring and the ability to change the brand it would bring. So the first thing that my team did, and frankly the larger marketing department had to do, is do some just homework on what was going on and figure out why traffic was waning and what the brand had to actually do to sort of get back on its feet. And what we learned in that process was basically that we had a value issue, a value perception issue, and we had a larger perception issue where we just weren't relevant. If you were under 40, we weren't relevant because we were that evil fast food company and not Five Guys, not Chipotle, not those other guys who were interesting. If you were over 40, We weren't interesting because our quality was not great. We were lumped in with everyone else in fast food. So the larger objective we actually had was be relevant again, and be relevant again, over 40 on quality and under 40 in just being a brand that people actually want to relate with. So that's what actually led to Fresh Never Frozen Beef coming back as our kind of TV, rally
Yeah.
cry. And that was really the over 40 play, try to get people in with that quality claim that everyone understood and connected with. And then under 40, it was really be a relatable, interesting brand that actually had a position.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back to Wendy's and its original positioning, I would argue Wendy's, it was established as a brand in 1984 when they went on TV with Clara Peller and they had the "Where's the Beef" ad.
Yeah.
And that's an ad I saw in college. I was
Where's the
born in
beef?
19. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was like 4 when that ad aired,
Yeah.
but it's an iconic moment of advertising where a brand called out other brands, actually had something to say, it was interesting, changed the culture in the process. And we went back to that ad and said, well, what's that version of in 2011, 2012, what's the version of "Where's the Beef" that would exist? And what we came up with is it social media. And specifically, we needed social media where we could interact with people and actually call out competitors.
Mm.
So I began building that team and building that positioning around that challenger position, using social as the under 40 sort of drive to try to further the position of the better brand that's a challenger. Hired a few people, started to see a few successes because we hired the right people that had the right voice and the right tone and the right attitude that could bring that to life. I hired people that were natives to the platform. The first person I hired, name was Amy. She was a copywriter that just sounded like what I wanted Wendy to sound like.
Nice.
Uh, so she was on Twitter, and I kind of stalked her on Twitter for a few weeks, and then I called her and said, "Hey, this is really weird, but I'm trying to do this, and I know brands aren't really doing this, but you sound like what I want the brand to sound like." And she agreed, and then started to get attention, and it started to snowball from there. And I started to get more resources. I started to be able to hire more people. I started getting more responsibility very quickly. I was running more than just digital and social. I ended up, running pretty much all the consumer-facing communications for the brand, including
Yeah.
media and creative, and got to build that strategy, that objective of reposition the brand to be more relevant, and to be that sort of uh, challenger brand associated with people over 40 with Fresh Never Frozen Beef, and under 40 with this attitude in platforms like Twitter. And that led us to a huge shift in the organization. Now, a lot of other things were going on. There were a ton of smart people there that were helping do amazing things, in operations, in the design of the restaurants, and all sorts of things. But what all that work led to was we went from 10 years of decline to starting to flip positive. In about a year and a half, we started to flip positive. And then, I think they just reported the 30th quarter of growth. On the back of all that, I left at quarter 17 or 18. So long story short here is we had a much bigger objective there. The bigger objective was reposition the brand around this challenger mentality that would differentiate it and create relevance for the consumer. And just the right way to do it was digital social. And frankly, we could have got 6 months into it and decided that wasn't the right way to do it.
Yeah.
So, we just found it and it started to work, and it took a while, by the way. It took 6 to 8 months before people started to notice. And I had a lot of really uncomfortable conversations with people at Wendy's and board members and all sorts of important folks because they didn't get what we were trying to accomplish.
I can only
You know,
imagine. You got some suited board member and looking at and so for those listening, if you haven't heard of the fun or the snarky Wendy's or just the Wendy's throwing flame and heat at competitors on Twitter, you just Google it. Wendy's tweets, snarky Wendy's tweets, hilarious Wendy Twitter. And there's things that says like Wendy's is roasting people on Twitter, and it's just too cool to pass up. 20 plus hilarious Twitter roast by Wendy's Twitter. So 21 savage tweets that proves Wendy's Twitter is the best, right? So all these things, people can click on those, and what you see in there, if you aren't familiar, is things like someone tweeting, and not even at Wendy's, just saying, "I want Wendy's, but my girlfriend wants McDonald's. What do I do?" And literally Wendy's with the verified check mark next to it says there are plenty of fish in the sea. Right. So I can only imagine. And another time it was McDonald's with something and there was a trash bag, or McDonald's tweeted out Black Friday with a little placeholder that says need copy and link, like they messed up the tweet. Wendy's saw it, grabbed it, replied, "Hey, when the tweets are as broken as the ice cream machine, burn." Right? So these are hilarious. And as a consumer, I found these hilarious, but I can only imagine when you have the establishment going like, "What are you doing? We're a family restaurant. You're being mean to people." How did you handle those higher level conversations, those board calls and those kind of things?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's why you always have to start with the objective, right? So I made
Yeah.
it very clear before we started working on it. We have a bigger positioning project to work on here. That this is one outlet of that positioning project. So you're going to hear fresh, never frozen beef, and you're going to see that on television. And this other thing is going to happen because it needs to happen to help us reposition. And we have to see if it works. We're not sure if it's going to work, but we have to see if it's going to work. So I think one is you start with the position. Two, I was a little lucky that, think of what a board member usually looks like, what an executive at a multi-billion-dollar international company looks like. Generally, they're not the kind of people that are heavy on places like Twitter. At least they certainly weren't in 2010, 2011.
You lucked
So,
out.
so a lot of the stuff that we were doing kind of flew under the radar at first, and not all of it. I did have, like I said, I had some very uncomfortable conversations, but I was always able to go back to, I'm not doing this thing because others are doing it, which is, I would argue, some are doing that today. Just they're
Totally.
copying what others are
Totally.
doing in any social platform.
Yep.
Nobody else was really doing it like this. So it wasn't just that we're following a trend. It wasn't we were just trying to be controversial, even though that obviously has a component to the reason people paid attention to it.
Yeah.
It was because it fit the brand. So my
Yeah.
default, I'm on my heels, defending the position to somebody who's really important. My default position was, what did people say about Where's the Beef when it hit? And it was the exact same thing. Exact same thing. In fact, Where's the Beef, that ad only ran for a month.
Really?
It only ran for a month because people internally were so uncomfortable with it. So,
Yet we know decades later, we
oh
weren't
my
even
God, I mean,
around or born then or
you would have thought
whatever.
you'd have thought that had been like that Sunsetter ad that's been running for 30 years, that still runs on the afternoon TV, that had been run forever. It ran for a month, and that's it. And the reason, because people internally were uncomfortable with it, but it established a brand.
Yeah.
It created a brand that then Dave picked up on when he became the spokesperson. Dave, was the spokesperson for Wendy's for almost 2 decades, if I'm not mistaken. And in that time, he was that same attitude. He always questioned why you go somewhere else. He always was focusing on, we're better than the competition. That's our position is better. So I always would default to, well, Where's the Beef was that way. Is this worse than what we did in 1984? And it's 30 plus years later, and we're still uncomfortable with that. And fortunately, once you start doing something that, one, it's backed by a serious marketing objective or just brand objective, two, has some history to back up that it's got validity for your brand, and three, actually starts to show signs that it's working, it's really hard for someone to undo that thing. I mean, I was asked to fire people that did the work. Towards the end
Really?
even of the process. Oh my God, all the time. Because some people in that world where you are being snarky, where you're pushing on brands, you're going to make mistakes. You're just going to make mistakes. You're going to say something that goes too far, or you're going to say something that you didn't realize that it had some sort of context that was wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
you can Google this stuff. The number of mistakes that happened at Wendy's and at other brands I've been at, it's high. It's not
Yeah.
crazy, and we dealt with them and moved on. But there were enough that people would use it sometimes who didn't like the strategy or didn't understand the strategy as an excuse to say, oh, you need to fire this person, or you need to change the way you're doing this. And did we have to put in some rules here and there that we didn't have at the beginning? Yeah, but in the end, it was backed by an objective, and that's the bigger thing. It was trying to accomplish something bigger, and it did. If you look at what happened to the perception of Wendy's as a brand, if you look at how that softened the ground for everything else that they're doing, even today, I'd argue, it's momentous. It totally changed the conversation about that brand. It was an irrelevant brand that people thought was kind of lost. And yeah, there was a lot of nostalgia for products, and the products were still good. The actual Restaurant didn't change a lot. It was just the way we marketed it and the way we positioned it, and then a lot of the hard work that went around it, like I mentioned, between operations and store design and all sorts of other stuff
Yeah.
to reinforce that position.
Right. I'm not sure if anyone misses the salad bar and the little Jello jiggler that
Yeah.
they had on there.
Yeah, I mean, there's always some temporary things that and you know what? I had franchisees, I had people externally say, "Bring back the X" all the time, and the funny part about it is those individual features usually actually aren't the thing that saves a brand. Usually, what saves a brand is the attitude, it's the vibe, it's the direction, it's the thing it makes you feel. Function's important. You have to fulfill functional needs, but emotion is what actually makes you make decisions. That's why logos matter. I mean, there's a Nike shirt and a shirt that's made of the same quality that doesn't have the Nike logo is 30% in price. And it's because that logo. They've built trust. They've built a relationship with you that's bigger. So I'd argue you have to focus on that emotional component and that attitude. Otherwise, you're not actually gonna create a brand that means something.
The emotions are so powerful. Yeah, and let me just take you back real quick. You mentioned just almost just a little tactical. So I'm just curious. You know, there's like a thin line of that snark, and you mentioned that you protected the team, and you had overall objectives. You had history, had early signs it's working to sort of help protect your position and protect the team around you. But you know, how do you I mean, were there things where you had to delete the tweet or and then I'll just read a couple others, at Wendy's, BK for the win. And then Wendy's is like, would they win a participation trophy? Or should I go In and Out Burger? What should I get? You should get out. Right. So
Yeah.
the ones listed here are all hilarious. How did you, arrange the team so that Amy and others don't get the boot and maybe don't
Yeah.
cross the line. They don't get mean, but they say fun. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we hired really good people, and I think that's just a good policy. Period.
Yeah.
Is you hire people that are extremely talented, good at the thing that you need them to do. Amy Brown was a copywriter. Still works in social. Again, and a few other agency folks we hired, they were comedians. This is what they did.
Oh,
This
what
was their
what agency
job.
was that?
VML out of Kansas City. So they still do the work today. Um,
Nice.
I brought them as a digital agency, and then ultimately, excuse me, gave them all the media and creative work along with the social work that was sort of the original ask,
Cool.
or
Just
one
in
of the
case you
original
needed to
asks.
bump the agency.
Hey, they're good. They're good.
That's good.
So we brought in the right people. I think that's a huge component.
Right people.
We did create some rules. So we created some rules, and an example of a rule was if somebody thought they were crossing the line, they just needed to text me. So I could say yes or no. And I wanted people to push up against the line, and sometimes it's hard to determine where that line is. So we had several moments where I get a text at 11 o'clock at night or 8:30 in the morning or whatever, and I gotta say yes or no to something. So ultimately, I was the one who could stand up in front of the thing and say,
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with this, and this is why I'm comfortable with it, and this is why I said yes. So we did that. We also put some basic rules. You don't use curse words. You don't. It's never mean spirited.
Yeah.
It's always with a wink and a smile. And we used to say that you've had a persona, obviously, of what this person looks like, and at the time we used Chris Pratt from Guardians of the Galaxy a lot as an example, to say like
Yes.
he's gonna be snarky, he's gonna be pushing, but he's not gonna say something that like he can't take back, or that really hurts someone's feelings, deep down. So we had a clear definition of what this was and what the voice was. But again, we did make mistakes. We had
Yeah.
moments where someone would go too far and we deleted a tweet. And we had moments where people wrote articles about that. I mean, there were probably half a dozen articles written in the 6 years, which frankly, with the number of communications that went out every day, is shocking it was that low. Where someone would say that Wendy's did this and they shouldn't have, kind of thing. In fact, very early on, there was an article, I want to say it was Forbes, wrote an article about how we were ruining social media because
Wow.
brands shouldn't sound like people. And I get that. And in 2010, 2011, not a lot of brands sounded like people. So it was a strange thing to see, especially a Midwestern, well-established multi-billion-dollar company kind of sounding like a human being.
And that was
Um,
Forbes?
I think it was. I can't remember. It was one
Okay.
of the publications that was respected. It wasn't like it was
Right.
some blog from nowhere, but
Makes
it
you
was
want
a
to go back
respect.
and be like, "How you like me now, Grandpa?"
Well, they ended up writing another article like 3 years later, saying something like how it was the same publication. I want to say again. I want to say it was Forbes. Wrote an article like 3 years later saying how Wendy's revolutionized its brand and used the social presence as one of the examples. So
Right.
again, hindsight's always 20/20, and you don't
Yeah.
you don't know if something's working until it shows up in the numbers, and it takes time to show up in the numbers. Like I said, it took us a year and a half of pretty daily drudgery to get to the point where we really started to get noticed, where it started to show up in the actual business. And until it started to show up in the business, people weren't really confident. At least people who didn't understand the strategy weren't terribly confident that it was the right strategy.
Hmm.
Um,
I could see it's also like opening Pandora's box because I know at start it was kind of like you're burning McDonald's and other competitors, and then you have people that just the idea of the roast, right? And there's certain comedy, for those listening, if you haven't, there's roasts you can see on YouTube and they're hilarious, but it's literally comics like like making fun of each other in like horrible ways because they're really brilliant comics, and that can be if you're into roasts and like, oh, please roast me. And so I was seeing a lot of tweets start being like, oh, don't now roast me now, can you please roast me, Wendy's, and people like
yeah,
asking for that. And in the context of a roast, it can be really funny, but one guy was like, hey, roast me or I'm gonna go to McDonald's. And so it was something like 1997 called and they want your backwards hat back or something like that. And so did it evolve into, okay, do we have to pick our battles? We're still making fun of McDonald's and we make fun of our fans if they're laughing, but we got how do you sort that out?
yeah. It started heavier against brands and mostly against our core competitive set, other
Yeah.
hamburger chains, and then it started to open up. But frankly, we didn't define it that way. We
Okay.
just said this was what Where's the Beef was. This is what this voice kind of sounds like, and we let really talented people do their jobs.
Yeah.
So Amy and Matt and others at the agency and others internally at Wendy's. We had somebody named Meredith at Wendy's that knew what they were doing and knew the platforms.
Yeah.
And so they were able to actually, do the work that got attention and be interesting and be funny, but again, not go so far that you read something and you're like, whoa, 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 this brand's being a total jerk.
Right.
Even though once in a while, out of context, you'd pull something and be like, whoa, I'm kind of surprised the brand said that sort of thing. And if you go back to the really early moments, the 2011, 2012 moments when we were still kind of warming up to this thing and it was starting to take hold, most of it was pushing on brands,
Yeah.
and the vast majority was actually against McDonald's and Burger King specifically. So those two, we tried to actually stay away from Whataburger and In-N-Out and a few others at first because they're regional and they're frankly pretty good
Yeah.
and
I
all that
like
stuff.
Whataburger.
I love Whataburger. Right? I'm in
Yeah.
Texas. I got a Whataburger all the time. And there's nothing wrong with animal style at In-N-Out. And even like Five Guys, and I mean it's good food. So it's hard to say, for fast food anyways, it's hard to say that you should push against those guys. But the McDonald's and the Burger Kings of the world were kind of easy pickings.
Easy
And,
pickings.
and actually what the original brand was founded for. So Dave founded the brand. Dave Thomas founded the brand because he didn't like what he was seeing at McDonald's and Burger King. He said there's a better alternative out there. We can make, using fresh beef, using better ingredients, using sort of better prep, we can actually make a cheeseburger that you get at a drive-through that's significantly better.
Yeah.
And so that's why we started there. But we kind of let it go where it went, as long as it didn't go so far that it was, starting to hurt people's feelings a lot.
Right. Right.
Except for
But
McDonald's and Burger King,
except for
it's
those
okay.
guys.
It was
Yeah.
perfectly fine to hurt Burger King's feelings. We had no problem
Totally
with that.
fair game, right?
Right.
Let's go like back to higher levels, like the strategy side, because I know the idea of the challenger, coming in, the challenger brand. And I think when we were doing our intro beforehand, we were sort of like hashing out the topics. So like Burger King, like what are they? And what was your sense for what the emotions that you were going for? You were the challenger, and then you're dethroning the big ones, and then in I think we talked about too, like what is Burger King's challenge? Well, what was their challenge amidst all this?
Yeah, so I'd argue, or at least from our perspective, McDonald's position was sort of like the ubiquitous fast food company, and I think they actually embrace that really well. You see, the iconic kind of fry box, and all you got to see is the yellow and the red, and you immediately know what that is. So yellow the fries and the red of the box kind of thing. So McDonald's is sort of this stalwart of ubiquity in fast food, and they have 30,000 locations and billions of dollars and tens of
Just
billions of dollars
everywhere. They're the thing.
everywhere.
Yeah.
So if we challenge them, we're challenging them from the standpoint of sort of David and Goliath, right?
Yeah.
That these guys are the monster, that everything is uniform and generic and just about distribution, and Wendy's is more sort of like the quality play and the local play and the better play. So that was a pretty easy juxtaposition, us versus McDonald's. Burger King was a little different because Burger King, from a location standpoint, was much bigger than Wendy's, but from a revenue standpoint, it's pretty similar. Just that their individual restaurants tend to do less business than the Wendy's do. So it's not actually like a bigger player just from a dollars standpoint, the US anyway. It's and from a location standpoint, it's bigger. Our thing with Burger King, and I'd still argue this a bit, I don't know what Burger King really stands for. And I love a lot of their marketing, like the executions. They at Cannes sweep the floor a lot of years. They were marketer of the year a couple of years ago at Cannes, for example. They win awards, they get attention, they do work that's compelling and interesting executions. But I'm not smart enough to find the red thread right now. And I've heard them explain it a few times, and it's never resonated with me. Every time they explain like what is the thing that connects them, sometimes they're a challenger, sometimes they're around differentiation around flame broiled, sometimes they're just interesting and snarky, sometimes they're just fun, but I don't know what their center is.
Yeah.
And again, I've heard it explained, and I can't retain it because it doesn't work for me. So we never really targeted Burger King for a reason. We always just targeted Burger King because they didn't know who they were.
Yeah.
So, but we knew who we were. Wendy's has always been the challenger. It's always been, quality is our recipes on the sign. Where's the beef? Harkens back to that. Fresh never frozen beef is a statement that we're different than everyone else. So Wendy's, whether it was Dave on TV, whether it's where's the beef, always been the challenger. So, and challenging around the idea of we're better from a quality standpoint.
Yeah.
So it made sense for us to be the challenger and to challenge Burger King, but Burger King was actually always easy to pick on because it felt like they never knew who they were. So, and again, they do great executional work from a marketing standpoint, but it seems like it's a lot of value. I mean, heavy 2 for $5 stuff, and then on top of it, executions that are interesting. And I got to give them credit because those executions are super interesting, and a lot of people pay attention to it, and their business generally has grown pretty well on the back of those things. But I still don't know what the brand is. And when they run an ad that it feels like they're on the right track, like, they ran ads a few years ago where they were showing buildings, Burger King buildings that were burnt down. And the title underneath his print ads, the title was, "Seriously, we're flame broiled." They're playing on the idea that there's an actual flame inside the restaurant and it burnt the place down. That's genius. Be that. If that's who you are, be that. That's great.
Shots fired. Wow.
And it's interesting and it's creative and it's great. But then sometimes they run these challenger ads where, they have the billboard in Europe where there was a directions to McDonald's, and then they put next to it a billboard directions to Burger King, and it was this long set of lists because it was hundreds of miles away, but it's like, it's worth it. Take the extra time to go to Burger King. And now they're doing the moldy Whopper thing they did last year, which I thought was genius. But again, are they about artificial ingredients? How can you be 2 for $5 Whoppers and artificial ingredients and flame? It's just like there's so many directions, and I'm sure there's a bigger plan that I just don't get underneath it. But I can't put my finger on like, what is this brand? It just feels like they're almost anything to anyone who will listen. And that's not a brand. No. That's something else. And I hate to knock on them, but I don't work at Wendy's anymore, and I don't work for Burger King, so I don't really have a dog in the fight.
Yeah.
But I just really struggle with what is that brand. What In-N-Out is. What Whataburger even is. even though Whataburger may lose that a bit, they're kind of the Texas local, indulgent kind of place, but they may lose that with this new ownership. So they have to be careful there.
Mm.
You even know what White Castle is,
Yeah.
but I don't know what Burger King is, which is so strange to me.
White Castle, like that movie, like that journey to whatever, the journey to White Castle. Harold and Kumar like
That's
riding a
right.
panther.
And I love brands like that. I love brands. That's part of the reason I joined Potbelly, is
Yeah.
because I love brands that seem to have a really good sense of who they are, that are comfortable in their own skin.
Yeah.
Those are the brands that I think are magic, that they understand what they are in the world. It's just like a person. You meet a person who's very confident and they're themselves, and they don't deviate from that often. You like something about that person, and that's how I'm attracted to brands. Is, do they know who they are? And if they don't know who they are, I can help them find out maybe who they are, but then they got to be consistent with that.
Mm.
Uh,
How do
because I
you
mean,
how do you because I'm sure people are listening going like, man, I've sensed that too at Burger King. The idea of it's almost like what we just talked about at the very beginning, the idea of the tactives versus objectives. I see a lot of really interesting tactics, like the weird king guy with the mask, the okay, dancing around or something, and the anything burger and the veggie burger and the flame broiled. I just like a Whopper, maybe add some extra lettuce, but like, but at the same time, I don't really, every time if you ever go by, you're like, I don't really understand, you know? So yeah, it's almost like you need to find yourself. How do you help groups? I mean, obviously this takes time, but from a high level, how do you find yourself as a brand?
yeah, I mean, I think it all boils down to needs. You have to understand the emotional and functional needs that your brand fulfills for people, and that's the baseline that then helps you understand how do you communicate that you meet those needs in a way that's compelling, right?
Yeah.
And for most brands, it's really a bit of a just dig into your past, because there's a reason brands are successful when they first begin. And sometimes that reason becomes irrelevant over time, but often that's not the case. Often the original kind of orientation of the brand is the right position for that brand. You just maybe have to tweak it and modernize it. You go back to Wendy's is the good example there of this was the brand that was the challenger brand. That's why Dave started it. Well, just keep being that, and that's okay. It's fine just to find new outlets for that position. But it's really boils down to needs. And you think about, a brand like Wendy's, everyone wants to root for the underdog.
Mhm.
Everyone wants to be better. So better and this underdog challenger mentality are inherently emotional spaces to play, right? And the outlet of that can be a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be Twitter, but it just happened to work that social, Facebook, Twitter, and platforms like it were strong, outlets for that.
Mm.
You go to any brand, it doesn't matter the brand, you find that those needs that you're fulfilling, those emotional and functional needs, and sometimes societal needs if it's something bigger like a nonprofit or whatever, and you try to anchor the brand in those needs and then build your sort of positioning and your mentality around those needs. But again, it usually is a function of what made the brand successful when it first began, or what did the brand evolve to that really resonated with people. It's and consistency is king here. Oftentimes you see brands that can totally rework themselves. And I'm not just talking like a logo rework, that can be part of it, but
Mhm.
brands rework themselves, reinvent themselves often.
Like that
And
stupid Gap logo.
I mean, and again, I'm not necessarily picking on logos here, but logos can be an articulation of that,
Yeah.
where marketers get bored a lot before consumers get bored. So, we get burned out on the ad we're running or the positioning we're using or whatever. And everybody wants to put their personal fingerprint on something too. So a lot of times people come in and they just rework a position or whatever because they want it to be theirs. And I understand that, but that's ego.
Mhm.
You're there to serve the brand. Every brand I've been at, the brand is bigger than me. And I've got a pretty big ego because I believe in my teams and I believe in the work that I do, but the brand matters a lot more. That's why I leave when I'm not a fit anymore, when they don't need me to do the thing that I'm good at. So, and that's also why, you know, I've spent a lot of time working on the position and digging into the past of brands, because usually it is there somewhere in the past. And if you can unearth that thing, brush it off, maybe put a modern spin on it or a modern tactical sort of outlet for it, usually you're going to find something that will resonate with consumers today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's shocking to me that brands constantly change who they are. An example I'd give you that I think is a great example of a brand going back to what was they were good at. And I'm not a big tagline guy. I don't think taglines generally are the way to go for most brands, because brands can't stick with a thing for more than 10 minutes. What's the point of a tagline if you can't do it for
Right.
10 minutes?
Yeah.
State Farm just went back to like a good neighbor. That's genius to me. And it's genius to me because they had established that for years and years and years. And it directly connects into the position of that brand, the kind of trust. I mean, it's called State Farm. It's the name is intended
Yeah.
to make you feel trust and stability. So the fact that they went back to like a good neighbor, I think is really smart, because that is the orientation, that's the position, it's tagline, but that's the position that resonated with people. And what's the point of just coming up with something new for the sake of coming up with something new? Do the thing that works, do the things that people actually care about and resonates with them. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Dude, so cool to think about these things. And whether it's fast food or digital sprockets or widgets or SaaS or like this is a lesson that carries on. And whether you're selling fries or, clicks or whatever it is, like it's true. Like, are you something? Or are you just lukewarm? Do you have a position? What is it? And is it exciting? When you were talking about some of these positions, like, yeah, I could see that. And my own brain's going, my own company. Oh, what's exciting? And you're right, that challenger, that's exciting. Let's take down the big guys. And then getting back to what was your original position, and maybe that sort of reignites everyone's spirit. Yeah, we were taking on the big guys. Why did we try to become like them? Why don't we get
Yeah.
back to trying to take them out instead?
Yep.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Well, you've been a lot of places, and we talked about, you're in places, and I wanted to ask you, Papa John's, one
Yeah.
of those brands that was just everywhere, had the spokespeople, all the things all the things going on, and then it sort of falls off the map. And I didn't even realize, maybe to their credit, till later on when I saw that, like, there was some controversy happening, like people getting angry, and you were there right about the time when all this was happening. Um, what can you say about it? I don't want to get you in trouble, but like, what kind of beans can you spill here?
Well, I mean, we kind of start from the beginning. I was at Wendy's and ready to try something new
Yeah.
and learn more, frankly. Wendy's is a very brick and mortar location, and we had digital and some e-commerce. In fact, I helped build some of that stuff at Wendy's, but I really needed to learn sort of true e-commerce.
Yeah.
And I had and this is 2017, middle of 2017, and I had Papa John's asking me to come on board and be their chief marketing officer. So I joined Papa John's to basically, for one reason, and to do two things. So the one reason was I love taking a commodity and breaking it out as a brand and making it
Wow.
actually interesting. That just gets me excited. I don't know why, but for some reason it's fascinating to me that people choose a commodity based on a logo. You choose a bottle of water based on the logo on the bottle of water. It is
Totally.
literally the most commoditized commodity there is, but
Totally.
you choose Fiji over something else because of the Fiji logo. That's fascinating to me. So pizza is one of the most commoditized parts of food, period. It's all a lot price driven. 80+% of transactions happen through dealing, and the majority of it happens through e-commerce, through the website or the app. So they asked me to come, and basically I joined because I thought this was a brand that, in a very commoditized space, had the opportunity to actually break out and be interesting for product. Better ingredients, better pizza, Papa John's, right?
Great.
That's their sort
Yeah.
of founding, mentality.
Burned in my brain.
So that's right. So I wanted to build on that and actually differentiate Papa John's. Domino's was kicking their butt when I joined, even though they were growing. But Domino's was the dominant player, really, because they were focused on distribution and not products. So I thought there was a hole here for somebody to be about pizza and
Yeah.
good pizza.
Kind of like the McDonald's,
So
like they're
that's
everywhere.
right.
You can
That's
you can
right.
go to them anytime. You know that they're there.
That's right. But if you want something better, this is your
Yeah.
opportunity. So,
Yeah.
so I joined Papa John's because I thought that would be the way to proceed. There was focus on better, focus on product, make sure that it's understood that this commodity category has an outlying brand that you should pay attention to.
Yeah.
Really, there were two tasks as I came on. One was their media program, their marketing program really was built around traditional media and traditional outlets. And there's nothing wrong with traditional. You know, I one of the things that I hold up is I'm media agnostic. I do what works. I really don't care where you put your media dollars as long as it affects the consumer and the objectives you have.
Yeah.
But that's a big miss to say you're majorly traditional when the majority of your business is actually flowing through digital. And part of the reason Domino's was dominating was they were very good at things like performance marketing, and Papa John's wasn't. So
Yeah.
one
They got the
was
pizza tracker app.
that's
They got
right.
all these little things going on.
So one was sort of like digitize their marketing and
Cool.
make it a little modern.
And that's like
The
your
second
sweet spot too. Like you had just really helped good old fashioned brick Wendy's become modern as hell.
That's right. So that's kind of what I thought that this is an easy effort. It'll probably take me a year and we'll get it done. And the second thing was work on the position. What is the position? And again, that goes back to the better ingredients, better pizza, and own that versus own dealing and things like that, which kind of had become the mentality of the brand. So I joined in middle of 2017 and kicked off a huge research project to figure out what should the position be. Is better ingredients, better pizza relevant? How should that come to life? And usually when I start at a brand, if there's not good research, that's what I do. I just kick off a project that lets us understand the target, understand the needs of the target, understand how to actually approach that brand in a way for consumers that will resonate. I'm a big believer in starting with facts, and then you move to gut as the facts help inform your gut. So kicked off that research study. And while we were doing that work, the team did a lot of work to digitize and modernize. And I would say my first 6 months while that research was happening, that's pretty much what I did. And what my team did was we reworked the team, reworked our agency relationships, reworked our media partnerships, reworked some of our sponsorships, did a lot of awesome work. Actually, we shot ads with JJ Watt and Peyton Manning and a bunch of other folks that were really good. We shot a whole series of ads with Mike.
Did you meet those guys? You get a chance to
be
on set and be like,
cool.
"What's up, guys?"
Peyton Manning, down to pizza sitting in front of me, which is pretty awesome. An entire
whole pizza.
Well, I mean, the dude's a football player, right?
He's a guy. He's a big
guy. I can do it too, but I don't look like Peyton Manning.
Me too. It just looks gross if I do it.
That's right. So did a whole series of ads with Mike Rowe that were awesome, that kind of played on the idea that football is this institution because they were a big football sponsor, and that was a big part of their kind of sports and sponsorships was a big part of their buys. So put a performance marketing layer in play, put a social and not necessarily a social organic like we did at Wendy's, but more of a social, paid social approach. So we wouldn't be conquested by partners. Started to see actually benefit in all that, where our ROAS began to rise, where our rankings began to rise, our SEO and SEM began to actually show bear fruit. As that was all happening, the research started to come in for the positioning. And essentially what the research told us, and I got to be delicate here, but the research essentially said better ingredients, better pizza works, but you got some other things in your repertoire that you need to work on. And we had to work on what is the right way to bring this brand forward so it works for everybody and it can grow under this better pizza positioning, better ingredients, better pizza. So we started to work on that, and it became real clear as I was going through that process that this organization just wasn't ready to shift its positioning. It just wasn't ready for what it asked me to do. And some controversy began to pop up, and CMOs are usually on kind of year-long blocks of contracts, and I had the opportunity to walk away, and I did, because I knew they were in for a 2 or 3 year fight to figure out kind of the soul of the brand, what they wanted to be as a position. I had the research, we had the facts, I gave them those facts. Very proud of the work we did on the e-commerce side and the digitization side, because I think it helps set them up for the future. They're killing it now. They're killing it now because they moved past the positioning issues and they've oriented around product. Notice if you watch their ads today, Rob, the new CEO, came in, who's a really smart dude who came from Arby's and a bunch of other great work. He positioned it around the product. So the product is sort of the hero now, about better product. And that aligned with the more modern approach, I would argue, to media and things like performance marketing, is part of the reason that I think they've started to gain their footing again over the last, especially year and a half. They were ready when COVID hit, and I think they reported plus 25, plus 29. They're doing better than they're comping better than Domino's now. And
Really? Wow.
yeah, and I'm proud to say I was part of that at the very beginning. Having said that, the folks in play right now are the ones that are certainly responsible for the comps that they're seeing. So yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a tumultuous year. I moved my family to Kentucky, then moved to Chicago within a year.
Jeez.
So that's a little crazy, but I learned so much about especially e-commerce and digitization when it relates to actual like click to buy.
Yeah.
Pizza is Amazon. It just is. It doesn't behave like a normal brick and mortar company. And in that year, I had so much exposure. I feel like I got 10 years of knowledge crammed in my head in a year. So
Wow.
that was awesome. But it was a pretty short run, and they're killing it now. So I'm really proud of the folks that are left behind, but also really proud to say I was a very, very small piece of what now is a very successful company. Go to any other brand that has had a spokesperson, Maytag with their, the Maytag man,
Yeah.
Mr. Whipple back in the day before I was even watching television. You go back to any Flo, a Progressive, you go to
Yeah.
any spokesperson, that spokesperson is a tactic. And that tactic is supposed to bring forward something, and that tactic has value, and it's a mnemonic device that helps you remember, something that you want to relate that to that brand, but it's still a tactic. And if you're not constantly true to the position and what the position gets you, and you let the tactic become its own thing, it sort of unravels and the tactic becomes irrelevant. That was happening at Wendy's when I first joined. We had a redhead woman that was our spokesperson,
Got it.
and a lot of people have forgotten about her, but she was on TV for like 3 years, and she became the tactic versus the actual position, or she was the tactic, not the position, and she became the objective was use her. And that's not the way to approach any brand. You have to treat the tactic like what it is, which is a means to an end, and the end is the position and the objective, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Yeah, I was just Googling. I'm like, who was this spokesperson? I'm like, oh, I vaguely remember. Oh, it's like Wendy essentially. But you're right. Like it falls short, and even like a founder of the company, it's just a tactic. And then it needs to reflect what the overall position is. Otherwise, it falls flat. And to your point, it can go off the rails. And it didn't for your Wendy's Twitter because you had an objective, you had a position, and this was just a representation of it. This was just one of the tactics to get it out there. But
Exactly
yeah, I
right.
could totally see other brands. Hey, this spokesperson is our way of doing, but it's like, no, that's too much to ask one person to do. What do you actually believe in first and foremost? And then let's find a person that represents that.
And I'd also argue those tactics, when they take on a life of their own and they become the objective, is use the tactic. The problem with it is you get married to the tactic, and
Yeah.
the tactic eventually will stop working. It just will. That's how every tactic is. Every tactic eventually reaches the end of its life. So if you commit millions of dollars to a actor who's a spokesperson, and it turns out that actor has some controversy or is irrelevant for some reason, or isn't as interesting to the audience as they were 3 years ago or 5 years ago when you started, that's a problem. That's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And then you look at brands that go the other way, where they get tired of their tactic, like Dos Equis. And I love using examples because there's so many wonderful brands out there. But Dos Equis, most interesting man in the world, amazing campaign, right? I'd argue that actor was pretty tied to that campaign. And there's a larger positioning underneath it that this is an exotic drink that makes you interesting. That's the thing underneath the whole thing, right? And he was the articulation of it. And then they tried to move past it with a new actor, and it didn't work, because I would argue they did one of two things. They either spent way too long with that original actor, which made it cement the idea that he is the most interesting man in the world. I mean, literally, you're saying this person is the most interesting man,
he's an actual person,
and then you change him. So either that happened, or what may have happened is they weren't really true to the original reason that campaign was so strong. I mean, think about back in the day, that campaign, it was really about this sort of cartoon character of a guy, this caricature of a world traveler that was so interesting that it was unreal. And he fit this. He was an older guy with this gray beard that was always surrounded by people, and It just, when you get something that rich, you have to decide what is the position, and then you have to think about what in 3 years, how does that position live in a way that the tactic can continue to evolve. And that's hard. That's
It is
really
hard.
hard, because in the moment it feels like, that spokesperson is the objective, and it's not. The position underneath it is bigger and more interesting. Most Interesting Man in the World is a great platform.
Yeah.
Really careful you execute it, so ultimately, you don't get married to a single actor, and when that person asks for too much money or decides they want to retire, you don't destroy your whole campaign, which is what I'd argue kind of happened at Dos Equis.
So, and I know hindsight's 2020. Carrying on this conversation, if you were at Dos Equis at that time, CMO, what kind of things would you have changed? Or maybe it's even deeper than that, but anything come to mind? Like, what would you have done differently?
I mean, I can't pretend to be even slightly as
I know,
intelligent as
but
those
just
guys were,
pretend
because
because
their
it's a
campaign was
podcast.
crazy good. But I mean, I think what you have to do as a marketing leader, CMO, or any role like that, is you have to think about, always stay true to the objective and the position, and then you have to map it out over time. And that map has to be flexible, because ultimately consumers are going to tell you what works and what doesn't. But for example, if you would have started in that campaign and seen in that first 6 months or a year that The Most Interesting Man in the World is absolutely killing it, and that first year I would have tried to map out, what does this look like in 2 years, in 3 years, in 5 years? And it may die before you get to that 3 or 5 year mark.
Right.
But you have to map it out, because what they could have done, and again, hindsight is 2020, you said
Totally.
it. What they could have done is mapped it out, that like the torch is passed to a new Most Interesting Man, and then a torch is passed to a new Most Interesting Man.
Yeah.
This happens, right? Brands
Like
do
Doctor
that.
Who. They could Doctor Who it,
That happens. Well, brands will transition the idea to something else. And I'd argue State Farm just did it from Jake to the new Jake. Brands do that, where they transition from one kind of element to another, but they keep the core true. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But if you map it out and do your best to kind of follow the consumer as they're finding what's good and what doesn't work, and stay true to what worked in the original kind of sense, I think that can be really powerful. But you got to stay true to the objective and the brand, not the tactic. Eventually Flo will decide she doesn't want to work anymore. She just will. She's, I'm sure, rich beyond all rich at this point, from being on commercials for probably a decade now or more. So you have to plan for that, and that's what it looks like they're doing with that second actor. And ideally, if you can actually go bigger than a person, when you see a cartoon character, when you see something that's not even a character, something that's just a bigger idea, what McDonald's does with the kind of iconic fry box and the iconic, the kind of clip art like elements that they use, that's bigger than an actor or a tactic that will age out. So I think Nike does that all the time. When Nike celebrates a moment in sport, they're holding up the idea of athleticism and the value of athleticism. I think the core position of Nike is something like, everyone with a body is an athlete, and they hold up athleticism as the primary sort of drive of everything. So it makes sense when they put Colin Kaepernick in an ad. It makes sense when they run the ad of the kid who's overweight, who's running, trying to lose weight. It makes sense when they celebrate, Kobe. It makes sense because they're about something bigger and deeper. And it takes time to build that as a brand. But if you can own that emotional space and that position and that objective, you're much better served than relying solely on a tactic and a spokesperson, because ultimately that's going to age out. It just will.
Man, I feel like I talked to you for days. I feel like almost every consumer brand, I just want to bounce it off you and be like, what do you think? But I'm starting to see the pattern. I'm seeing people either have that underlying position and underlying emotions tied to it. Nike, you're right. It's the moment. It's the athlete. Everyone's an athlete. So everyone should have that logo. And then it's a thought in our head. It's not tied to Michael Jordan, right? It's like, it's tied to every feeling associated with working out, versus that one person, poor Flo, or like in my mind, like Subway and Jared, like I caramba, like, that's, spokesperson gone wrong, I guess.
Subway had something. Subway had something great. They had Fresh,
Yeah.
and Fresh is very functional, but they owned the idea of fast food that's actually not that bad for you. And Fresh was sort of an articulation of that. And I'd argue they they traded a very short-term win for a long-term fail. The short-term win to me was the $5 foot. The short-term fail, I'm sure, was the $5 foot long, and it worked great for them for like 3 years, and then it undid the brand. So
Hmm.
that brand to me is almost irrelevant now, and it's irrelevant because they focused on a very short-term goal of price. So they went to $5 foot long, which totally unraveled the better for you mentality and the fresh mentality. I mean, they had Michael, I'm sorry, the swimmer, Michael,
Phelps.
yeah, the most famous swimmer ever. I lose his name in my head, but Michael Phelps is a spokesperson. Back in the day, they used fresh, trying to be an articulation of that because he lost weight, right? Now, mind you, again, that's why you don't tie yourself to a person. You tie yourself to an idea, because that
Yeah.
person gets into trouble. You need to walk away from it quickly. But even though you can use the person as a tactic, so I would argue, Subway had an amazing position in Eat Fresh and the idea underneath it of this kind of better for you fast food. And then they decided to get this quick win of $5 footlong that drove huge business for a few years, but then totally unraveled everything. So I think you have to think about the long view of that stuff and how it
Yeah.
actually plays out. And just one thing I'd add before we move on is, Seth Godin is one of these crazy genius marketers, right? You've
What's his
probably
name?
seen.
Oh, Godin.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I may have said his name wrong. I've only
Oh
read his
yeah, no
book.
worries. Okay. Yep.
That, but one of those crazy genius marketers and knows just about more than any marketer should ever know in their lifetime. And he used the line to sort of check this against brand, and his was, if you can take the brand, the logo, and put it on a totally different category of product, and you understand what that product would feel like, you have a great brand. And he used the example of Nike. He said, you could take the Nike logo and put it on a hotel and immediately imagine what that hotel might be like. And I just thought that was like, it blew my mind when I heard that. I'm like, that's a great anecdote to share when someone says, what is a great brand? Is they actually carry something bigger than feature benefit, bigger than product. And to me, that's the sign that you have a really strong brand. If you can slap that logo on something that is totally unrelated to your product or category, and people immediately be like, yeah, I know what that would be like. Um, so I think that's the
I love
magic
that.
under brands. It takes time to build. It's not something you do overnight. You might need to do things like use spokespeople as a tactic to build that thing. But you got to stay true to that objective and that positioning, because otherwise you don't build the brand. You end up just doing something like a $5 foot long that gets you a couple of years of benefit and then breaks things in the long run.
Jeez. I think Subway's doomed. I saw them in the strip mall. The only thing that could save them is if they hired you, but I don't
I,
I don't
am
know.
not gonna I'm not gonna work for Subway anytime soon. But I would tell you though, that brand is, any brand is salvageable. Any brand is salvageable. Subway, if they reestablish their bona fides against kind of the better for you fast food, and they did it for real. I mean, think what the moldy Whopper thing that Burger King is doing. Why isn't Subway doing stuff like that? Why,
Yeah.
that should be the branch, and it's going to hurt for like 3 years. It's going to hurt. The same benefit they got for 2 or 3 years on $5 foot long, they're going to feel that pain for 2 to 3 years while they transition away from dealing and that being their only mechanism for being a brand. But if they're willing to suffer for a couple of years to transition to be what they were, 10 years ago, I think that brand could come back. I do. I mean, their footprint is ridiculous. It's still the single largest footprint of any fast food company in the world. Um, there's no reason those places shouldn't be doing a million, 2 million, 5 a location. They're doing like 400 a location or 500 a location.
Yeah.
Um, and while I was a Potbelly, I was very glad they didn't do that, because I didn't worry about them. They
Right.
weren't a threat to what I was doing at Potbelly, because they were still focused on dealing, and dealing is a position, but you have to live it through and through. I mean, Walmart can effectively do dealing, but the reason they can do it is because they have the infrastructure to manage it, but the product just doesn't fit that at Subway. So they got work to do, but any brand is salvageable. It doesn't matter the brand.
Man, you're like a brand superhero. Brandon, who are you, man? Who are you? Can you take me back in time? Like little you days? Did you always know you're going to be doing something related to brands like this? I mean, you seem like the brand whisperer at this point. So take me back. What was it like? Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. My mom was a teacher. Actually, had her for fifth grade. So
How
I
was
went to her
that? Was that
school.
as bad as it sounds, or was it cool?
It was interesting. She was actually really good about it. My mom is
Cool.
probably the most empathetic person I've ever met in my life. So she's very good at understanding how you feel and how to make you feel good and how to make you feel comfortable and all that. So it was good. But went to a little school in Cincinnati, or Loveland, technically Ohio, a suburb of Cincinnati. Um, Went to a Catholic grade school, Catholic high school. Went to a little college in Northern Kentucky,
Nice.
little public college in Northern Kentucky. I actually went to school my first couple of years as a biology major. I thought I wanted to be a scientist or something. I don't know. I just loved. I think the fundamental core issue was I could never stop asking the question why.
Yeah.
Like when I was a little kid, if kids get deprogrammed from that, I was never deprogrammed from that. So I always wanted to know how things work. I wanted to know why things worked. I wanted to know why people did what they did. So I went to school as a biology major, switched to marketing because I took a marketing job to pay for my college, actually,
Okay.
and loved it and was good at it. So I worked full time through college to pay my way and my wife's way, because I'm my high school sweetheart is who I married and went to college with. Um, and then got into the world in marketing, in college, and led me to work in an agency and actually an industrial computer company, working on a lot of technical and technology stuff. Kind of learned the basics of marketing on the agency side, which if you've never worked in an agency, I suggest people work in an agency at some point as marketers, because you learn how to move fast and be efficient and be scrappy and understand how to pitch and sell and all that stuff like nothing else. And then found my way to Wendy's, and then Papa John's, and then Potbelly. So, they got the core. I'm just a kid who never could stop asking why, and I do think that actually has served me really well, because that's the first question I ask when I see anything in my work life, and I came to really appreciate how people think and how they work, and their perspectives. My mom gave me that empathy, so I feel like I can see things from people's perspectives, which led me to a love for brands and these relationships people have for brands, which led me to be a marketer. So who knows? I don't know who I am. One day I'll figure out who I am, but I just think I'm that kid who never stopped asking why. Maybe.
Well, it sounds like you've got your position figured out.
Maybe. I
That's
don't
why
know.
that's why all these tactics are working.
Maybe.
I can't imagine what comes next for you, man. I'm excited. I know it's the talks are happening, so nothing to announce yet, but you have to hit me up afterward and tell me what exciting brand I should keep an eye open for, you know?
I'll do that. I'll do that. I'm if you had to guess, probably a place that has got a great brand, and has the opportunity to express it in a more compelling way. Because that's what I love doing, right? I love taking those brands that are a bit commoditized and figuring out a way to make sure people pay attention to them and they're
Yeah.
relevant in the modern world. So that's kind of what I'm digging on right now.
And maybe something with food because I'm sensing a pattern. And food's fun, man. Making me
I tell
hungry
you,
for
I don't
lunch.
know. I've said no to about a half a dozen food gigs,
Yeah,
since I left Potbelly, just because I love working in food, but I also don't want to be typecast as the food guy. I've
that's
been in
true.
food for 10 or 11 years, but I didn't start in food. My first 10 years of marketing wasn't in food. So I'm actually looking harder at places that, and the couple opportunities that I'm getting really close on that I think I might, say yes to, are outside of food. So we'll see. I can always, visit places and eat there, but I don't necessarily have to work for them. So we'll see.
Well, it's smart. It sounds like you're taking your own advice that you would have given Dos Equis and others to if you don't want to be the food czar, then you're right. That next one should probably not be food. But either way, you're right. It's every time I ask you all these different versions of this question, you're like objective. What's the position? What's the soul of this thing? And then what does it become? So it sounds like Burger King listening to this. Sorry guys, not gonna happen.
Yeah,
And
and Burger King, I'm sure I'm sure they're comfortable with their team right now. But when you get down to it, I think that's right. I at my heart, in my heart, love making brands that are in a commoditized space break out. I love creating a relationship between a brand and people. I think there's magic in that, and it's crazy that human beings even have relationships with brands. So I just gotta figure out which brand I want to work on next. So.
yeah, I'm gonna open up the betting polls to see which brand should be salvaged by Brandon Rhoten here.
And you know what? I'm okay not salvaging too. I'm okay just building a brand that's already doing okay. That's all
Doing
right. The
okay.
salvaging thing is hard. It's okay. I don't mind doing it, but I don't always want to do it. I got a 2-year-old now. I don't have as much time to salvage as I used to.
Right.
So
Give me a good one that we can just take further. And also, yeah, I keep, like you said, people prevent them from just going whole hog on just one tactic and then finding themselves out out in the dark after that thing expires itself. So even helping a company not do that, mapping it out like you said would be fantastic. All right,
yep.
so I have a hypothetical for you. I
Sure.
may or may not have a time machine here in Nashua, New Hampshire. Maybe not. It's in the backyard, covered with a tarp. And so let's say I let you use it. We'll clean it off, COVID and all. And you get to use this time machine. You go back in time and you get to meet yourself right after you graduated school. You've been doing the marketing jobs. You just got that degree. You're free to head out into the world even more so now. What kind of things would you tell yourself, knowing all of the companies you've been through and the challenges you've had? What kind of advice would you give yourself?
Yeah. One, I would say, save some money. Not because I didn't save some money, I did, but because if you're going to take risks, you're going to have moments that you're either going to have to do the right thing for the brand, or or you're going to have to accept something that you shouldn't be doing for the brand because you still need a paycheck. So I'm a strong believer in putting some money in the bank just so you can take risks. Take care of your family still, but take some risks. So that's number one, is just throw some money in the bank. Number two, boring kills brands. You cannot have a brand that is boring and successful. That doesn't mean it has to be controversial. It just has to actually meet some emotional needs. And what the gravity of most organizations moves you to boring. Because if everybody in that boardroom is shaking their head, yes, this is a great idea. If everybody on the management team is saying, yes, this is a great idea, odds are it's safe. It's really, really safe. And probably vanilla and probably boring as hell. So you gotta understand that boring kills brands, which means you have to do things that are actually compelling and interesting. And it doesn't have to be controversial. Again, I want to make sure I'm clear there. It doesn't have to be something that hurts people's feelings or is in any way, breaking things. But boring kills brands. The third thing I think I tell myself is the brand is bigger than you. And I learned this pretty early in my career, but it took a few years for me to learn it, right? The brand is going to last past you. And if you do your job right, you're going to look back and the brand will be stronger because what you did, but it will continue to grow in strength if you did your job right. So, I never want to look back on a company and see it do worse because I've left. The brand is bigger than you, and you have to set up the infrastructure, the team, the make the right strategic decisions to make the brand bigger than you. The brand will survive without you too. But
Yeah.
that's your job. Your job as a leader is to make sure that brand is stronger for your time there, and that when you leave, you look back and say, "Look at that thing! I'm so proud of that. I am so proud of my teams at every company I've been at." And you have to do that. The people who are bitter because they left and they didn't get to accomplish everything they wanted to, or because they left under circumstances that weren't ideal or whatever, I don't get that at all. You are smaller than that brand. That brand is what matters, not you. So I think those are the three things: put some money in the bank. Um, the brand is bigger than you, and I can't remember the second thing. What was the second thing?
Boring
Boring.
kills
Yeah, boring
brands.
kills. See, look, I even forgot the most interesting one.
It's
Boring
all
kills
good.
brands.
It's all
So
good,
I
man.
think I think that's what I tell myself.
Sweet. I was gonna say, preach, man.
Yeah, it's
It's
good
awesome.
stuff. It's good
Dude, you're
stuff.
you're one of my new favorite humans now.
Hey,
It,
look at that.
you're like constant sound bites of wisdom.
even if I forget the occasional soundbite, but yeah,
No, they used to have
I
those
will
books,
say
in the bathroom. They were little wisdom. You'd open up. Let me learn something new.
startup quotes and all that. No, I mean, but I think you've experienced this. I'm sure everybody's experienced this. You go through your career and you learn so much, and if you
Yeah.
take the time to reflect on those things and apply them in the future, every time you go to a different place, every time you start something new, every time you start a new project, you just get better and sharper. And it's super exciting. It's super exciting. And you need that because the older you get, the more you have to let others do the work, right?
Yeah.
Um, as you move up in an organization, if you try to do everything, you're not going to do well. So you have to be able to give them that guidance that lets them do the work really well.
Yeah, man. Inspiring to think about what could your position be? What could your brand be? The people listening, and I'm thinking that too, like, oh, what could this actually be? Life's too short to go through the motions, to have the boring brands. And you're right, you need to take time to think about your thinking. It's like a Dan Sullivan quote. And I found journaling lately is just like the thing for me. I'm doing this like 30-day journaling challenge because every time I do, it's like the gym. Every time you do it, you're like, that was great. Why don't I do this more? Just taking a second and some coffee, saying like, okay, how do I feel about anything, all of these
Yeah.
things, what I just did, what I just learned, this podcast, just writing, kind of clarifying in your own mind what you think about it before you hop into the next calendar or the next thing in your day that just tells you what you should be thinking.
Yeah, you're totally right. And you're going to make a million mistakes. And if you do things like journal or think about it, you're going to learn from those mistakes. And then they're not mistakes. They get you somewhere better down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Have you found time to get outside these days, get some camping in, hiking?
Yeah, a little bit. It's snowing here in Chicago right now, so we got to go outside and play in the
And are
snow
you like
too.
suburbs? So you're like in like, or where
Yeah,
you
I'm in
really?
Hinsdale. I'm in
Yeah.
Hinsdale, so I'm on the west side
Yeah.
of Chicago, or on the western suburbs of Chicago. Yeah, a little bit. With COVID, we've been trying to keep our bubble pretty tight, just because we don't want to be those
Totally.
people that make people sick. But we love the outdoors. If we can, we spend most of our time somewhere where you're sitting in the sun. We've got a couple trips booked. I got a trip down to Texas booked, and we got a trip to Florida booked, so we can spend some time outside. But kind of play it by ear, trying to be safe. You know how that goes.
It's tough, man. Yeah, the travel plans are all kind of, you're like, I want to plan it and I hope it actually works, but half of you's
Yeah,
like, oh, it may get canceled. So it's tough. But any kind of fresh air and sunshine, it's amazing. Back to the primal days of just something as simple as like those kind of ingredients.
it's
And just
true. And
really,
and I think today, I'm one of those guys that's connected kind of 24/7, just because that's my world, right? And
yeah,
and to be able to turn off social channels, to be able to shut all that down is really important. You just got to do it every once in a while. And when you're in a place with no cell signal, it's pretty amazing, at least for a couple of days.
yeah,
I love all that stuff, but I also love turning it off and getting some perspective. And then, once the cell signal picks back up in 3 or 4 days, the world usually is still okay.
right.
Um,
You don't have to approve any Wendy's tweets anymore. So
that's right. That's
got the
right. I'm
freedom
not.
back.
That's
That's
right. It's
cool, man.
exactly right.
Well, hey, where can people reach out if they want to connect to you, learn more about where do you want Burger King to go when they send you that offer you can't
I don't, I
refuse?
don't, I don't need any nasty whatever from Burger King. But I'm on LinkedIn. Fortunately, my
Okay.
last name isn't Smith, so it's pretty easy to find me. Rhoten. So you can catch me on LinkedIn. On Twitter, I'm more of a kind of a viewer than a poster there. I tend to post more to LinkedIn just because I Twitter, I think you have to be either all in or not all in order to actually get the most of it. That's why Wendy's was all in, and I don't really have the energy to be all in. I got a million other things going on.
Yeah, I see you on there. A lot of retweets from you. A lot of good ones though. Good retweets.
Yeah, so ultimately, I'm mostly on LinkedIn, so that's probably the best place to catch me is on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Sick. Okay. We'll do that. And we will keep an eye open to see what happens and where you land. I'm stoked. I can't wait. I'll probably go buy stock from the company wherever you go if they're publicly traded.
Well, it usually takes me a year or two to figure out what's going on, so you might want to wait just a little bit.
I'll play the long game. I bought Tesla at like 30, man. I'm
Well, you're
pretty
doing all right then. If you bought Tesla at 30, I mean, GameStop's going crazy right now, but usually it takes me 6 months or a year to figure out what's going on and get things in play. But I appreciate that.
Okay.
I've been very fortunate in my career, work with some awesome people,
Yeah.
and I still got a decade or two left to play here, so we'll see what happens.
I love it. I love it. Well, thanks again, man, for being on here. Just great conversation. I learned a bunch. It's been fun.
Yep. Thanks, Casey. Keep doing what you're doing. It's good stuff.
All right. And for those listening, this has been the Hardcore Marketing Show. We will catch you all next time.